have a right to speak the truth. And
For years, Meghan Markle's public story moved through the world like a mirror, reflecting back whatever audiences were inclined to see. To some, it represented reinvention. To others, escape, glamour, or modern independence. And surrounding it all was a carefully maintained quiet that once felt like composure. Questioning that silence often seemed impolite, even unnecessary. But silence changes meaning over time. What once reads as dignity can slowly begin to feel like distance. And in this case, the first disruption didn't come from tabloids, documentaries, or palace statements. It came from family. Samantha Markle had long been dismissed in public discourse, framed as unreliable, emotional, or motivated by grievance. That framing made her easy to ignore. But when she returned to the conversation, her tone had shifted. There were no dramatic confrontations, no sweeping accusations. Instead, she offered something subtler and far more unsettling, a request to examine chronology. "Look at the timeline," she said. "No conclusions attached, just an invitation." Timelines are dangerous because they don't argue, they simply exist. And once attention turns to sequence rather than sentiment, certainty can begin to dissolve. Observers didn't respond with outrage, they responded with pause, with rewatching, with rereading, with noticing details that previously blended into the background. What emerged wasn't proof of wrongdoing, but a sense of narrative management, public announcements that emphasized outcomes rather than process, carefully worded language that confirmed events without lingering on experience. Long stretches of privacy framed as protection, yet notable when placed against historical norms. None of these elements proved anything on their own, but together they formed a pattern that invited scrutiny rather than dismissal. As the discussion widened, it shifted away from personal conflict and towards systems, how stories are constructed, how institutions preserve continuity, and how visibility is curated. Large institutions rarely confront ambiguity head-on. They stabilize, they simplify, they choose versions of events that require the least disruption. Silence in that context isn't malicious, it's efficient. What mattered most in this reframing was not accusation, but coherence. When narratives are solid, they withstand attention. When they require careful management, controlled language, limited witnesses, strategic absence, they invite questions, even without answers. Throughout this conversation, the focus never needed to rest on children, legitimacy, or intent. Those elements are not disputed. The real issue is scaffolding, how public stories are supported, protected, and maintained once they are in motion, and how difficult it becomes to revisit them once silence has done its work. Samantha's role in this narrative wasn't to provide conclusions, it was to disrupt certainty, to suggest that what people accepted instinctively might not be as straightforward as it appeared. Her insistence on chronology rather than conflict reframed the discussion from emotion to structure. And that is where discomfort lives, not in scandal, but in unresolved questions. Stories don't lose power when they are challenged loudly. They lose power when they lose immunity, when future statements are received with context instead of assumption, when silence is no longer empty but examined. This account does not end with proof. It does not end with confession or judgment. It ends with a shift in perception. Once attention turns to timelines, control gives way to sequence, and sequences don't respond to image, influence, or authority. They either align or they don't. And once people begin counting, the story is never quite the same.